Welcome to our new episodes, Dev's Hammer Show. I'm Dev Kumar Sunuwar. Every week in these episodes, we have a new guest to speak something about Indigenous peoples issues or in relation with development or any sort of human rights issues or Indigenous peoples movement. And in these episodes, we have our new guests who is from Denmark, and she is Asia Program Coordinator, and she represents IWGIA, International Work Group for Indigenous Affairs. And I would like to welcome Signe in our new episodes.
Thank you very much.
And as I told you, the background, and she basically oversees the Asia programs of IWGIA. And I would like her to introduce about herself and IWGIA in particular, what it does.
So my name is Signe Leth. As Dev said, I'm the Asia coordinator in IWGIA. IWGIA is the International Working Group for Indigenous Affairs based in Copenhagen in Denmark, where I live with my family. I'm personally a social anthropologist, and I've been working with Asia and indigenous peoples for more than 10 years. In IWGIA, I have worked for 2 years now, and IWGIA is a global organization supporting the struggles and the fight of indigenous peoples to be respected and recognized and to have their rights implemented. So that is basically our mandate. Next year we celebrate our 50th anniversary. So the organization was founded in 1968 by a group of anthropologists in Denmark who were so appalled by the situation of indigenous people in Latin America. So they wanted to do something about that. So the organization was formed, and basically what we do in practice is that we document the situation of indigenous peoples around the world. Together with our partners, we do publications. Last 2 days ago, we launched the Indigenous World, which is a yearbook of documenting the situation of indigenous peoples around the world. It was launched here in Kathmandu. That is one of the publications that we do. But we also have thematic briefs, urgent alerts, many kinds of publications. Then we also have projects implemented with our partners in the different countries. And we also do advocacy and lobby work on many different levels, also international level.
As you have said, that IWGIA documents the problems or the cases of indigenous people's struggle around the world, right? Mm-hmm. Could you tell me a little bit challenges or major challenges that indigenous peoples are facing around the world in a brief a little bit?
One of the things that we see around the world is the lack of respect for their rights. Even in countries where they do have legislation which is positive towards indigenous peoples, their rights are not respected. Mainly when it comes to resources, there is a big power struggle going on all over the world, and indigenous peoples, they pay for it with their lives, with imprisonments, torture. Very brutally, these struggles sometimes become when it comes to natural resources, such as mining activities, or even green energy projects, which are supposed to be good for our environment and climate, and which they probably are. But sometimes the people living underground are suffering from these projects as well.
The statistics says that 37 million population around the world, the population of indigenous peoples. 70%, right? They live in Asia? 70?
Yeah, yes.
70%. Since you are the Asia Program Coordinator,
Mm-hmm.
is there any differences in terms of issues or power struggles between the Asian indigenous peoples and the struggles of indigenous peoples around the world?
Well, of course, there are a lot of similarities as well. They do face many of the same challenges, but one thing that I find particular for the Asia indigenous peoples is that most governments don't recognize that they even exist. They claim that the whole population of their country is indigenous, so no need to specify a specific group. Luckily, that is not the case in Nepal.
Yeah, as you have interned into Nepal, that IWGIA has been a part or friends of Nepalese indigenous peoples as well. That means IWGIA has been supporting indigenous peoples of Nepal. As in Nepal, we have just adopted new constitutions, and afterward we have a new local restructuring of the country as well. How, as an expert from outside of Nepal, have you been observing indigenous peoples movement in Nepal?
As an outsider, I have been following the processes in Nepal quite closely, or as close as I could. And it has been very interesting to see what has been going on. Of course, the movement in Nepal has always been very strong compared to many other countries in Asia, which is a huge advantage for the indigenous people in this country. But I also see that there are some challenges in keeping the movement together as one, which would make you even stronger as a movement if you would stand together on your issues. But I also see a positive tendency to also join forces with others who are also struggling but might not be indigenous, like the Madhesis or the Dalits. So joining forces is always a good strategy when you want to fight for your rights.
As you're also one of the women, and it is said that women's issues obviously is different from males' issues. But within indigenous groups also, there are the issues of indigenous women are a little bit different, or some issues are similar to indigenous men as well. But how do you see indigenous women's status around the world or in Asia? How do you analyze their situation?
I think, of course, they face the same challenges as indigenous men, but on top of that, usually they also face additional challenges, such as they are not always included in decision-making processes, especially at the political level, even at village level. So having a say as an indigenous woman can be quite difficult. Also, there's a huge challenge when it comes to military occupying indigenous people's land, or armed forces protecting, for instance, natural resources or natural parks. When there are armed or groups in the area, women are often very vulnerable to attacks or rape or all kinds of harassments, which they are more exposed to than men.
After women's issues, I want to return back to our overall indigenous peoples issues. Previously, you said that indigenous peoples around the world can learn something from Nepal as well, in terms of association, you said. But lately we have different experiences, even though there are united movement, but then their movement is less strong, right?
Mm.
And how can indigenous peoples of Nepal again stand up and raise their voices, and so that again they can show their model to outsider as well?
Well, it is of course my hope that the movement can find back together to the common struggle, but it might need new methods, like TV or radio or other forms of communication can be helpful in connecting people again. But also, I would strongly urge the movement to get together and find a common analysis of what are our issues here in Nepal, what should we be focusing on, and how to do it, and then agree on that, and then share the load and do your work.
When we talk about indigenous people's struggle or their rights, we often take an example of Philippines, right? They have their own separate laws or rights. And can you tell, since you have been working, I think you have been closely looking the issues of indigenous peoples in the Philippines or their rights. Could you tell us a little bit about, their rights in the Philippines, how they are secured, so that we, Nepalese people also can learn from them?
Well, the Philippines is in some ways a good example because they do have, as you say, some favorable legislation which is supporting their existence and right to control their own resources, for example. But in reality, underground, most of these rights are not recognized, and the institutions that were set up to support their rights are not functioning to that benefit. Actually, due to many things, corruption, power struggles, there are many reasons. But anyway, the system that was set up to protect their rights is actually working against the indigenous peoples. So now the indigenous movement in the Philippines is actually lobbying to abolish that whole system because it doesn't work for them. And sometimes they feel that it was actually easier before to stand up and protect their territories than after these things were set up.
When I read some of the publication of IWGIA, I happen to see that lately IWGIA has given focus more on human right violation of indigenous peoples in relation to business activities, right? In Nepal also there are many multinational companies who have been supporting for the hydropower and other business related companies. And could you tell us your experience that how these kinds of business related activities can violate the rights of indigenous peoples as such?
Well, there are so many examples, unfortunately, how these kinds of projects are violating the rights of indigenous peoples, especially when it comes to free, prior and informed consent. So often the government would give the permission for these companies to start their business because it would provide electricity, for instance, to the Nepalese people. So yes, that is a good thing, but they don't have the right procedures set up to ensure that indigenous peoples who live on that land have been informed properly about the pros and cons of this project and have been asked, so what is your opinion and what do you want? What does it take for you to accept that we do this project? Is there a need for compensation? Do we need to reallocate you somewhere else? Or what are the needs of the community to be able to accept this development project? Because the people are not against development, but it has to be on the right terms and conditions.
So you said that a free, prior and informed consent, which is one of the major instruments or major rights which has been provisioned under the ILO Convention 169 and UN RAPE, and there is in relation with business and human rights. UN also has guiding principles, and Nepal has been party to this ILO Convention 169, UN RAPE as well. Even, right, a moral, moral supports for UN guiding principles on business and human rights, right? Mm-hmm. So does Nepal government has its moral obligations or legal obligations to fulfill, to secure
Yes.
the rights of indigenous peoples?
Certainly they do, in my opinion. And actually at the book launch the other day, the minister said himself that there are gaps in implementation of the ILO Convention 169 and that his ministry is really willing to work on that and to prepare a national action plan to be able to fulfill those obligations.
So since IWGIA has been working in Nepal for several years, I hope it also has a plan to work in the future. How can indigenous peoples partner with IWGIA, or IWGIA can partner with indigenous peoples in Nepal?
Yeah, we hope to be able to continue our work here in Nepal. We are also challenged by having enough funds to do all the things that we want to do. But we do work with some core partners, and together we hope to be able to strengthen the whole movement of indigenous peoples in Nepal. And through these partners, we hope to be able to bring also the cases of human rights violations of indigenous peoples to the international level. So by documenting and really having solid documentation of these violations makes our work easier to support the indigenous peoples of Nepal to bring your issues to the international level.
So before closing, if you have any message for indigenous peoples of Nepal?
Well, I hope that the indigenous peoples of Nepal can join forces again and really be a joint movement once more for the inspiration of all other indigenous peoples, especially in Asia.
Thank you so much, Signe Leth, for your time as well as your knowledge, or for giving us your at least a little time from your busy schedule.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.